Warren's ride into work on the monorail shuttle for the first time has more than a few hints of Half-Life's iconic introduction about it. The surge doesn't take anywhere near as long for things to go completely tits up though, and while I'm not allowed to show that opening to you for reasons of 1 or 2 spoilers that Deck 13 have very much kept under wraps, this introduction to the world and to CREO shows them to be this classically shady futuristic megacorporation and then tears it all apart off screen. You don't pay witness to how things go completely wrong, but rather wake up all of a sudden in a world that has gone completely to hell. The biggest and most tangible difference between this game and its peers in the ultra-hard action RPG genre is the granularity of the combat and how that ties into your progression. Every human character in this facility has been given an exoskeleton which helps to boost their strength, their speed, and their survivability in a pretty demanding workplace. And that seems to have had a major role in turning everyone in this sprawling industrial facility into a kind of robotic zombies that want to attack you. That's all thanks to the neural link to the exoskeleton that everybody wears, but it doesn't take long for you to discover that those enemies are probably the least of your worries. Whenever you lock onto an enemy, a flick of the right analog stick lets you target different parts of the enemy, which on a robo-zombified human means there's 4 limbs, the head and the torso. All of your attacks will then be directed at that particular body part, and the accurate hit detection means that each strike will hit whatever it hits. If that means you go through sweeping through both legs, then it deals damage to both of those limbs. Unless you're targeting the torso, which is pretty finicky, it's actually a really nice and fluid system. It's about more than just giving you some gruesome finishing moves that rend enemies limb from limb, though that is obviously a big part of it. The way that you upgrade your own exoskeleton is by ripping off new parts from enemies in such a way that the circuitry isn't fried when removed from their neural link, pushing you to batter away at a particular limb until you have enough combat energy to pull a finishing move. And combat energy is a third meter to try and keep track of alongside health and stamina, built up through the process of landing hits and draining away if you're inactive for too long. It gradually becomes more and more important to the game's kind of risk-reward in combat, and it pushes you to keep attacking, keep getting those hits, and not be quite so cautious. As you explore a new area, you'll have to do this time and again. You can only harvest 1 exoskeleton part from each enemy, and even then you'll have to collect multiples of those limbs to provide enough resources to fabricate a new one back at the medbay. Weapons, meanwhile, only need to be picked up the one time in order to be used, but again require you to go hunting for materials to upgrade. After you've fully explored an area, you'll probably just want to start getting enemies out of the way as quickly as possible, and to that end, if you target unarmoured parts of them, you can deal an awful lot more damage, you can snagger them so that their attacks are blocked or interrupted, and it means that you can get through an area much quicker. Beyond improving your exoskeleton, you also have passive and active implants which can perform a variety of different functions. There's one that triggers an incessant beeping when you get close to a gear pickup, there's another that shows the enemy health bars, but the majority of them seem to be revolving around energy and health. On the passive side of things, most of them will boost your resistance or your health or affect how quickly energy is picked up or dissipates, but then you have the more active ones, and so you can have an implant that gives you 3 health recharges, another one that lets you actually convert combat energy into health, which is particularly useful in keeping you in battle, or you can convert that combat energy into a buff for your damage stats. The implants are a pretty important part of how Deck 13 are trying to push you to be more proactive than reactive in the game's combat. The need to target individual limbs and parts holds over to the boss fights as well, and these are generally not human, it seems. The first boss is rather reminiscent of Robocop's bipedal ED-209, but with sword arms instead of a massive minigun which is used to chop down company executives. That first boss isn't the best example of where the game is going with its boss design, but the second does a much better job of this as a kind of robotic donut of legs and jet thrusters. It's a pretty intimidating sight as it leaps towards you or floats on its jet thrusters while spinning its legs around like a whirling dervish. It's best to steer clear of that boss for a little while and bide your time until it lands, then get close, let it get an attack in, and it's at that point that you strike to target a particular leg to remove it, chipping away at this boss enemy and forcing it to alter its behaviour over the course of the fight. Obviously, given the little subgenre of action RPG, this is a very challenging game, but it actually lulled me into this false sense of security. I know I'm not the most proficient of players in the Dark Souls subgenre, but I can make pretty good headway with enough time and patience. But I felt pretty good about myself as I was going through the opening area, because I didn't die until I got to the first boss. Then the game brought me crashing back down to reality with that boss fight and the step up in difficulty in the second area. Outside of this first area, which is deliberately designed to ease new players into the gameplay and let you learn the ropes, that's when the Surge reverts to type. However, within this, there are still a number of pleasing concessions to make the game just that little bit more accessible to newcomers. Heading back to the med bay will reset the vast majority of enemies within the area, just as in similar games, but the Surge is the only one that I'm aware of where you can bank and store the tech scraps that you pick up as you fight enemies, meaning that you don't risk losing thousands of the scraps that are needed to upgrade your mech suit's power core, weapons and gear. But while it reduces risk on that side of things, it also ups the stakes on another. When you do die and respawn, whatever tech scraps you had on you at that time are left at the point where you fall, ready to be picked up again or lost forever if you fail to return to that point. Again, it's a very familiar system, but what the Surge does differently is give you a timer on how long you have to get back there. You've only got 2.5 minutes to return to your scraps and pick them up. But you've got two ways of going about this. You can either do this killing enemies, which helps to add time back onto the counter, or you can try and run past the enemies. In reality, it's not that much more difficult, but initially at least it adds that little bit more pressure, a little bit more tactical thinking to what you want to do. The game also fits the genre mold when it comes to the story, leaving you with this big mystery to uncover and not really giving you too many clues about what's really going on. However, it does feel a bit more open-handed towards you, and you'll find and rescue other survivors, talk to and be able to actually ask questions of other people who are advising you remotely. I do still find it amusing that whenever I could ask a character if they knew what had happened, they would without fail just go, "I've no idea," or something along those lines. With the Dark Souls series having recently concluded, fans of this niche genre that it gave rise to are kind of spoilt for choice at the moment. You've got that game's DLC finale, you've got the Japanese mythology-inspired Neo from earlier this year on PlayStation, and now you've got the Surge. But importantly for Deck 13, the Surge manages to stand on its own. There's some tweaks that could be called quite minor, but then you've got the limb targeting combat and the science fiction setting that really helps to differentiate the Surge from its peers. And it's clear that across the board, Deck 13 have put a lot of thought, care and attention into how the game is constructed and why. It won't be long until we actually find out if they've managed to put it off, because the Surge is actually out next week on the 16th of May. In the meantime, we've got this written preview over on the6axis.com, and we'll have a little bit more content about the game later this week. But as always, please do like and subscribe and share this video with people if you've enjoyed it. I hope you'll join us again soon, and until then, goodbye.